Hi, and welcome to another session, Searching for Answers, the program where we dig into the scriptural text to learn all we can about what it meant when it was originally written and what it means for our lives today. So while we introduce ourselves, grab your Bible or Bibles, translations, languages, whatever you've got, more the better, and we'll get started. Participants on our discussion panel this time are Dr. William Johnson, retired New Testament scholar and expert in the Epistle to the Hebrews. You'll see why that's important in a moment. We're particularly pleased to welcome this evening Pastor Rochelle Webster. Pastor Webster is on the pastoral staff of the Redlands SDA Church for Family Ministries, and she's joined us a time or two before. We're just glad to have her back with us. Dr. Leo Rancelin is a New Testament scholar in the School of Religion at Loma Linda University, of which he is the Associate Dean. And Leo, welcome. We're glad you're with us. So, my name is John Jones, La Sierra University, the school, the Divinity School, and we'll get started as you join us. The Epistle to the Hebrews, that fascinating, intriguing, and challenging book in the New Testament, right between James and between Titus and James. And we're going to roll up our sleeves and invite you to do the same with us. So here we go. Bill, start us off with chapter 11, the chapter that most people think of when they think of this book in the New Testament.
Yes. So we have worked through the earlier chapters, the theological discussion, some of it pretty heavy. Chapters 9 and 10. And now the latter part of the book, really starting at 10:19, is sort of the application of that theology, what it means. And the key word that will emerge is the word faith. We saw it earlier in chapters 3 and 4, but now it is developed at length. So I'll read maybe, John, 1 through 7.
Yes, that's as good a chunk as any, I suppose.
And I have with me today the New King James Version.
Good.
Reading verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks. By faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had taken him. Before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith.
Good. Thank you, Bill. What does it mean to live by faith? We have examples here, but the examples don't all work exactly the same way. They kind of cut across each other in some ways, don't they? So, Bill, that opening little section there of verses 1 through 3 kind of sets the stage for the examples that follow rapidly after that, right. Don't they?
The chapter after the first verse is basically a series of examples of faith.
Yeah.
The first verse then is key. It's sort of like the heading over the whole thing. It's interesting. Let me go back to it. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. Here the New King James is following the old King James.
Yes, that's a pretty good translation originally.
The word translated substance doesn't sort of mean a lot to me today, but there was a very interesting discovery in Egypt some years ago in which this word occurred on a piece of papyrus. Shed quite a bit of light. The story was this. There was, from papyrus, we gather that there was a dispute over property. Okay? And the owner of the property sent his slave with a document and a letter in an urn. The slave stopped at an inn, and during the night the inn burned. And so this document lay beneath the sands of Egypt for thousands of years. And then it was discovered, and it's interesting because the owner who's disputing the property says, as proof that it's really mine, I enclose my hypostasis.
Hypostasis.
That's the word translated substance. Yeah. And what does he enclose? The title deed. The title deed. So I like to think of this, I think accurately, faith is the title deed to things hoped for. Like, as though we had an Aunt Harriet, who owned property in Hawaii. She dies. She leaves the property to us. We've never been there, but we have the title deed. In other words, it's not something iffy, it's something guaranteed. The title deed gives us ownership. So that is key. Now, the two clauses of verse 1, I think the second one does not repeat the first. If you look at it, the title deed of things hoped for, that is a time reference, looking to the future. Whereas the second, the evidence of things not seen, that is a visual reference. Faith makes the invisible real to us.
Pragmaton, our own English words like pragmatic and practical are related. So we might say the reality of the things that we can't see. Would something like that work, you think? Yeah. Anybody else on verse 1?
The thing I'm struck with is this sense of assurance of hoped for things, conviction of the unseen things, so to speak. And so as I reflect on my life, we live in a world that is visually oriented, empirically oriented. That which is, I can see and touch, that's what's real. And this author seems to suggest that those hoped for things, the unseen, are just as real as my empirical visible world. And I struggle to grasp the nature of persevering faith along those lines, because I, like so many in this postmodern world, am thoroughly visually oriented.
It's hard for us. It's hard for us, isn't it, Rochelle, to march to the beat of a drum that beats a different rhythm, right, than our daily lives. We're so busy running around and watching our wristwatches and waiting for the red light to change at the intersection, and that's the reality of our lives, isn't it?
For me, I think of, and it's not actually the opposite, but my experience is the opposite of faith is control. Is that I want a world that I can control, that I can act, and then this thing will happen. And how often do we feel so out of control in our own situations and what's happening in a broader context, and we don't feel like we are in control of the situation. And when certainty comes around for me, it is certainty that I like certainty. I don't like uncertainty. I like to know before I act what the end outcome will be. And I like to have it and to be able to feel control in it. And so it's been a process of God's, it's been a process for me of God gently opening up my hand on this desire for control. And I think those of us who resonate with that probably resonate with the hearers of this letter to, this writing of Hebrews, in that they probably also felt like things were out of control in their lives in a very specific and dramatic way, and they wondered where control was, right? And how does faith connect with this question of control or knowing how everything will pan out?
You're right, they did not know. And indeed, when we go on further here in the next chapter or two, we're going to see that some of them are in prison, you know, and they're suffering, and things are not guaranteed. The funny thing is, the guarantee is the faith, and that we want the guarantee so we can have faith. I think you've said that very, very well.
Right.
But here, the faith is indeed the very hook on which we hang our experience, our religious experience, isn't it? Where does that leave us then? Where do we go from here?
Well, for me, it leads directly to the verse 3.
Yeah.
Which is, by faith we understand. Just even those brief words. By faith we understand. I remember reading in college this great book, Faith Seeking Understanding, which is based on, you know, Anselm's prayer of Lord. It's almost this Lord, I believe, help my unbelief concept, but it is the first step you take is the step of faith. And then on the ground of faith, you see its internal coherence. Once you're standing on faith, you see the world through a different lens, and it can make sense in a different way that you cannot see before you take the step of faith. It's like putting on, I don't know, it's like somebody trying to describe to you what color is, and they have these glasses that will enable you to see color when you're seeing black and white, and you say, no, I have to understand it first before I'll put the glasses on. And they say, no, just put on the glasses and then experience it and see it differently. And so for me, I love this kind of concept of faith-seeking understanding. By faith we understand, to say that it's not that we shouldn't seek to understand. And that is really critical and important, but it is that your first step in this realm or this world is a step of faith, and then see what emerges.
So understanding is not the a priori, the thing that comes first necessarily, huh? Bill, anything else jumps out at you here in the first three verses?
In other words, I think it was Anselm way back, 1200 or whatever. Faith-seeking understanding. We believe in order that we may understand, picking up on the wonderful comments there. So, and here he comes to creation, verse 3. The worlds come by the word of God. Out of nothing comes something.
Right.
The old song, you know, nothing ever comes from nothing. Well, that's not according to Hebrews. Something. So, faith.
So, Leo, for us, we've said this well already, so I won't belabor it, but what's real is that which,
For me. But this author suggests
the other way around.
The unseen things, the hoped for things are just as real to him as this.
And indeed, if this kind of Christianity in that day has some echoes of Hellenistic, of Greek ideas, that's more real, the unseen.
Exactly.
So that's interesting, isn't it?
Just add one more thing.
Please.
Our viewers, I'm sure, rush to Hebrews 11, neglecting 1 through 10. And I would appeal to them to realize that this author has beautifully set up chapter 11 with this rich sketch of theology in the first 10 chapters, especially chapters 7 through 10, where I think he gets at the heart of the theology that he wants to convey to his audience. And I hope that the solid food that he alluded to back in chapter 6 and not the milk, I think it's the solid food that he expects them to grasp. So here this audience is going through a great deal of suffering and hardship, persecution, loss of property, spiritual discouragement. We're going to see in chapter 12 another sketch of, hey, strengthen your drooping hands and weak knees,
Yeah.
right? And so he's got to activate them to a persevering kind of faith. And so here comes these all-stars
Yeah.
of the Old Testament
Yeah.
that demonstrated persevering faith through all kinds of circumstances.
And many times without fully arriving at what was promised. And so
Exactly.
we're going to really have to think about that one, aren't we, as we go forward?
John,
Yeah, please, Bill.
this long list of examples,
Yeah,
often referred to as heroes of faith.
yeah.
And my question is this: were they extraordinary people in themselves, or were they ordinary people who, because of faith, did extraordinary
Yeah.
things?
That's a very searching question, and I'm going to let that hang there rather than answer it, and let our viewers ponder that a little as well, and see, okay, if I were in this situation, how could I respond? But already it's clear that the faith is not another kind of work. It's not a matter of working up faith such that we ourselves generate the ticket to salvation. Huh? Anything any of you want to add to that? I think it's a point that will keep coming back to us this chapter. These people did, through faith, extraordinary things, but their faith was not an extraordinary creation that they worked up in their own hearts. At least that much, I
Well,
think.
to
we
use
can-
other categories, they're already in a state of grace
Yeah.
in relation.
Yes.
That's right.
Part of the community of believers.
Yeah, right.
And now they need to activate this persevering faith as they move in this journey, this
Yeah.
pilgrimage to the heavenly
Yeah,
city.
yeah. So shall we take these heroes and sheroes along the way here? Abel and Cain, the first juxtaposition of a couple of names, that contest of sacrifices, huh?
Right.
There's much we could say about it, but verse 4, Abel and Cain, it's understood to be partly a matter of which is the more acceptable sacrifice,
Right.
but ultimately it's a question of who had faith. That's the point he wants to make. Through his faith, he still speaks. Yeah. So does Abel still speak to us through his faith? Why does this author say this, and what are we to get out of it?
It's an entrancing phrase, isn't it? Through it, he being dead still speaks.
Yeah.
That often runs through my mind, you know. I think of it in terms of not Abel, but people I've known.
Yeah.
Even though they've passed on.
Their witness
life
carries
still
forward.
speaks and speak to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we've all known people who lived exemplary lives, not that anyone's perfect apart from Christ, but nonetheless something about people whose experience manifests the kingdom's values, carries on beyond this life, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The other day, I was at a memorial service for a dear friend. This man eventually occupied significant positions, you know, president of Andrews University. He was not a charismatic person. He's not a tall person. Okay? He was a gentle person. But he had a toughness about him when push came to shove. Okay? The tributes given at that memorial service, which went on for some time, they were extraordinary. So here's a person who, because of the integrity of his living, made and left a huge mark in the world. And so he being dead,
Yet speaketh, yes.
You know, connected to that though he, and by faith he still speaks even though he is dead, I resonate with what you're saying, and also from a postmodern, kind of the postmodern theology, not theology, postmodern philosophy sometimes dances with or embraces or wrestles with nihilism, right? The sense that the world is going to end and nothing that we do has any significance in the actual big picture.
Yeah.
That maybe, sure, your life will impact somebody, but in 2 generations you'll be forgotten, or whatever. This kind of concept of it actually doesn't matter in the big picture. And I know that's a postmodern philosophical perspective. Sometimes that's a perspective of those in our community who struggle with depression too.
Yes.
I mean, it's a real question of, does my life have significance? And what if I'm not actually doing the actions that have significance? So for me, this piece has, sure, his actions have significance, but also if we are held in God, and our faith assures us that God holds any of us always, then no matter what we've done, our lives still speak. Like we are still held. We are still significant beyond the actions that we take. So the by faith, for me, involves, yes, this is a record of things that he did that he did through faith, but it is also a record of the fact that God holds us.
And that nothing is ever lost.
Yeah, that nothing's right.
Nothing's ever lost with God.
Right.
right.
That our faith in God holds us, and that you don't have to necessarily have done amazing. I mean, that might be a slightly counterpoint to this precise direction that the author's going in, but I still think it's valid.
Sure.
Is that we are held in God by virtue of God, and not by virtue of what we do. And that part of faith, the faith being a gift from God part, I think connected with that gift is that we have significance still.
Right.
Yeah.
You notice the way faith is being developed here. It is much more than simply what we might call belief. Same word is translated faith or belief.
Yeah.
Much more than an intellectual assent. You know, it's closer to faithfulness. The hanging on to God, a trust in God, a relationship with God, faithfulness.
So it starts with God's faithfulness to us, doesn't it? Huh? Yeah, that's the divine initiative in our lives.
That's right.
But we are called upon, as you say, not merely to sign off on this or that doctrinal formulation or something. We are called to walk the walk of devotion and commitment and faithfulness as well. Yeah. So here's Abel. Enoch, verse 5 of chapter 11 in the Epistle to the Hebrews, Enoch is one of the few examples who actually, what can we say, actualizes and realizes and experiences something of the payoff in this life. He gets translated, right, into glory, indeed without experiencing death. He was taken. He was not found because God had taken him. Most of these examples are precisely of people who still died looking forward to whatever fulfillment.
Right.
So it's interesting that he leads off with Abel, whose life was cut short, Enoch, whose life goes on forever, and now it's everybody else's turn.
Right.
And we'll have a turn too, obviously, by implication, you know.
What I find in 5 and 6 here about Enoch is a number of features of faith. It seems to me Enoch had a passionate search and desire for God, that Enoch believed that God exists, right? I that's what the text says, that you know, you can't really please God unless you believe that he exists. Yeah. So there's not this option of being an agnostic or an atheist. You've got to have this resolute conviction that he exists. And also what gets noted here is that those who seek after God have to have this conviction that he is a rewarder.
Yeah. Verse 6.
Right.
These two, here's the closest thing we come to content, right? God exists, and God is faithful to reward. Yeah.
And there will be a reward for persevering faith.
That phrase, anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, was actually, it stood out to me as we were reading through it, because how, and this is a live question I have for the panel. How common were people who did not believe in any gods in that time period? I know it's common now, but
Very unusual.
very unusual, wasn't it?
Probably
Like-
didn't happen.
Right. So because when we read this, we think, when I read this, let me just specify. When I read this, initially, I think, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, as opposed to that God doesn't exist.
Right.
But that's a new thought. I mean, for most of human history, there was no concept that God did not exist. So is it that this God exists? Is it that this version of God exists? Is it what? It's just a surprising phrase to me, given.
Yeah. And it's very simple in the arena. Simply that he is. This is for third person singular verb to be.
Yeah.
Just that he is.
God is.
Yeah.
That's simple, that's straightforward. But you're right. In some ways, the text is looking down the generations, maybe, and speaking to us today in ways that, yeah. So he exists and he repays or rewards. Yeah. Verse 6 is interesting, isn't it? Without faith, it's impossible to please God. And again, this is not faith for the sake of pleasing God. It is simply that our lives cannot live in attuned with God or alignment with God. My words, not the text. But that faith is the mechanism by which we relate to God somehow. Can we put it that way? Something like that?
You notice he's playing on please. See, Enoch, before he was taken, he pleased God. Now, he doesn't say they had faith in God, but then it links with the next verse. See? It's impossible to please God without faith.
Yeah.
See? So, in other words, he had faith.
Yeah.
He believed that God is and that he rewards those who follow him.
Yeah.
Interesting way he gets there.
Yeah. And, excuse me, go ahead.
I'm not sure in all of Scripture there is a more robust, dynamic expression of faith. To me, what comes through here that it's active. It's again vibrant, dynamic, that expresses itself in active obedience to the will of God, and that's what pleases him, notwithstanding what they may be going through.
Right.
It's really difficult. And yet,
So,
this is what he expects of them.
Yeah. Obviously, and we have to unpack next time and what that really involves, because while the refrain is there as a noun, by faith, by faith, by faith, over and over, it's a noun. But really, the verb is lurking behind the noun, isn't it?
Exactly.
It was in the course of believing, we might say, that Abel, that Enoch, that Noah, and these other people, yes, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. We'll talk about it more next time on Searching for Answers.